This video is about how an inspection contingency works, or a due diligence contingency it might be referred to, in a real estate contract. So really there's a few key features of it that anyone negotiating a real estate deal or conducting a real estate transaction for someone else, such as a broker or an attorney, should be aware of. First key feature is the length of time. How long does the buyer have to conduct their due diligence on the property? Now, it does vary depending on whether it's a commercial transaction or residential transaction. For residential, usually you'll see somewhere between 7 to 14 days to conduct their due diligence. And for commercial, it's often longer. You might have 21 to 30 days, in part because commercial properties can be more complicated. You might have to go through more units, you might have to go through a store, you might have more driveways. So the commercial inspections can be more complicated than just going through like a 2-family or 1-family property. The types of inspections that will be completed during the due diligence, if you're in the state where I'm from, New Jersey, you'll always have like a general inspector go through it. You may have a search for underground oil tanks. You may do a radon test if it's a residential property. You might do a sewer scope to examine the sewer line to the street. So those are standard inspections. Now, once you get those inspection reports, they may recommend additional secondary inspections. For example, if they think they found a metallic object in the ground, you may have to do an exploratory dig to find out what that metallic object is in the ground. Or if they notice, mold in the attic, then they may suggest you have to have a roofer come out and assess the age of the roof and any potential leaks and what the repairs are. So that's what happens during the inspection contingency. Now, let's say the buyer, they have their 7 to 14 days or their 30-day period and they complete their inspections. What happens next? The question is, what is the buyer's right based on their inspection information? What can they do? Pro-buyer provision would have the buyer having a unilateral right of cancellation. Basically, they can decide walk away from the deal, cancel, or move forward. That is very powerful for the buyer because if you can cancel the transaction for any reason based on your inspections without needing the permission of the seller, you basically can renegotiate everything. There's no limit on what you can renegotiate. If you don't like, you make an offer for a better price or a repair or financial credit. If they don't like it, you walk away. So full leverage. Now, a lot of times that won't work for the seller because the seller has taken the property off the market and they may look at it like, look, I'm not going to give you a unilateral right of cancellation for any issue you want because I've taken risk passing on other offers, taking this off the market. So you can't just walk away from the deal willy-nilly, no reason. You're going to have to justify the inspection reason with either giving us, and how would the seller do it? They could have a right to offer a credit. So they could have a right to compensate before a buyer has a right to cancellation, or they could have a right to repair before the buyer would have a right to cancellation. So that kind of shifts the balance back to the seller because the buyer can't just walk away for tiny things, because if it's tiny issues in the report that they find, and you typically have to justify these things from like a professional report. You can't just say, you don't just walk through yourself and suggest that there are defects. You have to justify it in writing. So if the seller has that right to repair, right to offer credit, that will keep the buyer honest. So it's a more balanced process as opposed to a buyer just having the right to walk away. Now, what options does a buyer have in terms of how to proceed? So in terms of what they should get. So they ask the seller to make a repair, or they could ask the seller for a credit. What's the benefits and downsides of each? Credit has the advantage of the buyer can pick the contractors after the closing. They could use their people, which is a big benefit for them. Or, maybe they just get the money now and they can delay the repair. They can use the money now for something else and delay the repair if they want to take that approach. The other option is having the seller remediate the issue, which has the downside again that they might use their own people, and again they're not going to be the owners of the property after the closing, so they don't have very much incentive to go above and beyond in terms of the quality of the repair. That being said, anyone that's done an improvement project knows that there could be a cost overrun whenever you tackle one of these projects, or there could be unanticipated issues that happen when you're conducting repairs at a property. So the advantage there for the buyer side is that if the seller does it, they're on the hook for any extra damages that might occur and any cost overruns. If you just get a credit and the cost ends up being a lot more, then as the buyer, after the closing, it's too late to go back to the seller. On the other hand, if the seller is responsible for the repair before the closing, if there's a cost overrun or additional repairs need to get made as part of the overall project, then they're on the hook for that. So that's an advantage for the buyer. Now, assuming the seller is going to conduct the repair at the property, prior to the closing, there's a few things that the buyer would want to insist on. One is that the repair be conducted by qualified licensed contractors. You don't want them using a friend, a family member, or them trying to conduct the repair by themselves, because it's probably going to be a lower quality, and you don't really know who conducted it. If there's a qualified licensed contractor, you know the person was qualified, they likely did a better job, and then if there's a problem with the work in the future, you have someone you can go back to that had a license and insurance to make a claim. So that's why it's good to use qualified licensed contractor. You would also want to make sure that the invoices, whatever work was done, is paid in full, because if they didn't pay, if the seller hired contractors and didn't pay the contractors, that could become a like a mechanic's lien on the property. So you don't want to get those invoices for whatever the seller conducted. Obviously, some repairs might not require a permit, but to the extent that they were making a material modification to the property, installing any HVAC system, of heavy electrical work, those situations will call for a permit. So you'd want to make sure that the seller have applied for and provides copies of any permits that were necessary for the work. And then you'd want to have a contract provision that would allow you to do a reinspection in advance of the closing. Ideally, you're not just getting to the closing table and have to look at the repair for the first time, because let's face it, the seller, like I said, they have minimal motivation to do the repair because they're just doing it for your property. So there's a decent chance they might not do it right or do not a great job. So if you can go inspect it well in advance of the closing to make sure they did it right, that will prevent drama and stress like the day before or the morning of the closing, because you can have whatever work wasn't done quite right, there's a time period to correct it. So that's a video about what you need in your inspection, contingency, and due diligence clauses.